Yes, it's Errol Lawson, and because I'm a long-term thinker, I'm presuming to speak on behalf of my great-grandchildren.
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, thank you. These are short notes, and I hope it makes it easy for you. I started by setting the scene, which goes way back to a bit of philosophy. Decision to frack or not to frack is in the political domain, where issues of public interest and the common good are decided. At least we hope they are. Community attitudes were polarised almost immediately on first exposure to the unconventional gas proposition 4 or 5 years ago. So it wasn't a green field that the industry came into. The inquiry processes and reports may not have changed many minds. There's a low level of confidence in government and mistrust of industry, and I'm sure you've found that.
Yes.
Monumental failure of government due to failure to carry out due diligence, and that's, I think, where a lot of the trouble started. But the industry insistence, thanks to you, Justice Pepper, on evidence-based submission has led to a deeper understanding of the environmental, social and economic consequences of an unconventional gas industry. So we had a cold start 4 or 5 years ago. You pushed us into thinking through a lot of our objections, and I think the opponents are a lot better informed now about all the issues involved, and that's a good thing. Okay, the points. Robust regulatory regime. The inquiry's recommendations spell out the details of a robust regulatory regime, which is easy. Well, I don't even find it easy to say. I think that's a good outcome, because you've defined, as no previous inquiry has, the scope of a robust regulatory regime. Other inquiries have just tossed it over the fence and left it hanging there. You've defined what's there. There's a baseline for a robust regulatory regime, and that's a challenge to everybody. Industry can be relied upon to push back. I'm sure they are already. And because they're on the record of having said they're quite happy with the existing regulations, I'm quite sure they're pushing back as far as they can. Now, what are we faced with? The unconventional gas industry is at an early stage of exploration. There's a hell of a lot of work to be done, and not much has been done. Industry decisions to invest in production, the rate of production development are in the future and are not assured. My concern is not about the validity of the robust regulatory regime as defined, nor its intrinsic capability to withstand the industry pushback. What I am concerned about is the capability of the government to progressively fund and develop to operational maturity the necessary resources, people, equipment and funding, structures, processes and interfaces with industry to match the growth path of a gas industry through their stages of exploration, development, production, plug-in and abandonment and beyond. What I mean there is that it's no good having a document that says this is a robust regulatory regime unless the government regulator is ready in advance of the industry as they go through their stages. And that's what I'm concerned about, because that's an enormous project to build up a capability in advance of it being needed progressively to a time scale that's driven by the gas industry market in the world and the exploration results of the gas industry here. And on that note, I think the application of the user pays principle, which is very good, to fund the significant investment in a robust regime may not be fair to the early starters. So I can't imagine Origin being happy bearing the cost of, because they're the early starter by a long way, bearing the early cost of the robust regime when others come in and will benefit from it. Make sense?
No, makes sense.
Sure.
So you're the first person to have raised this, so
Yeah.
which is
Well,
again why we have these consultation meetings, because we always get valuable information and valuable thoughts. So
as I pointed out to some PFAS people yesterday, I'm an old project engineer, and things that stick in my mind are timetables and cost, and milestones. I just imagine. Anyway, that's another. Technical aspects. I remain concerned about the long-term well integrity after plug-in and abandonment. That's why my great-grandchildren come to mind. Industry statements and regulator advice confirm that industry under current regulations has no responsibility for wells after plug-in and abandonment. Sometime between completion and the geological processes that will squeeze the hole shut, the cement seal between the outermost casing and the rock will fail, resulting in loss of well integrity. Industry, on the one hand, has a vested interest in remediating loss of well integrity during production, because that's when they're making money. With loss of well integrity, migration paths develop from the fracked reservoir to the surface and/or intervening aquifers. One of the nice things out of the interim report was that I discovered there's a thing called ISO 16530-1.2017, which refers to well integrity. Section 3.6 advises that once a well has been abandoned, there's little prospect of re-entering the well for any purpose. Now, I really like to leave the industry spokesman out of this, but on the way through I discovered that ISO 16350.1 started, the early edition was 2014, and 2014, they're using 2017 now, but 2014 is now withdrawn. But the date 2014 stuck in my brain because during 2014 we were addressed by two Santos representatives who earnestly assured us that the cement seal would last in perpetuity. And that was said twice, and one of them winced when the other one said it twice. And if you want to know who the other one was, I'll tell you.
It was Origin and Santos?
Santos, when Matt Damon was working for Santos. We never saw the other one again. So I've assured, just by reading that standard, that all my work in the previous submission where I found out about well integrity on my own behalf was unnecessary, because that describes it beautifully. So I'm satisfied that there will be migration paths. So I've inquired the next step, which we almost addressed in my previous address. Is gas released after abandonment, and can it and other contaminants migrate upwards? The answers I get from the local experts around here is, one, there is no gas left, and that I doubt. Then I get another one, which is gas will rise. And that puzzles me, because if gas rises up, something's got to go down to replace it. And then the third one, hydrostatic pressure will keep it down. Now, there are three answers which start off with, it's no problem, in which case you wonder why they plug it anyway, to hydrostatic pressure will keep it down. And I think that applies during drilling and development, but I don't see any hydrostatic pressure after it's abandoned. Not if someone else thinks the gases will rise. These examples of the diversity of opinion among experts indicates a degree of uncertainty which surely calls for application of the precautionary principle. I submit that the inquiry needs to consider the very long-term consequences of loss of well integrity after plugging and abandonment. I put that in because I note that any answers I get from the industry and most of the information I see from the industry stops at plugging and abandonment. They seem to have got a worldview that they don't, well, in fact, they virtually said that they have no responsibility. As a greenhouse gas, methane in the atmosphere is 86 times as effective over a 20-year span as carbon dioxide. The worldwide increase in methane emissions challenges the claim that methane can be regarded as a transitional fuel between coal and renewables. So the two things come together. The wells will leak eventually over time. If there's a leaking path there, something will come out, and already methane emissions on the increase that have been attributed to fracking operations. How am I going for time?
You've got about 7 minutes.
Done. Economic impact. The A.C.L. Allen report is unconvincing, and it follows the pattern of previous reports in placing emphasis on jobs and dollars attributed to an unconventional gas industry, assumes that pastoral tourism and gas industries can coexist, assumes that after the gas industry departs, the affected communities and environment revert to their prior condition. I regard that report as most deficient as a source of information on net value to the community, and I emphasise net value, and communities to govern the government decisions. It fails to break down full-time equivalent job figures into direct, indirect and induced for each of the phases of exploration, appraisal, development, production and post-abandonment and plugging. Again, I revert to my old engineer experience. You break the task into phases. You estimate what the particular employment or resource implications are, and you map them out and you add them up. And I can't believe that the gas companies haven't got somewhere in their planning departments much better figures than 524 FTEs over 20 years. I mean, that is just an insult to any planning organisation that's seriously addressing a decision of this magnitude. And I think that's a deficiency that you should emphasise. And the figures keep going. Social impact. In submission 530, I commented on the report of NT Fracking Social Impact / Beetaloo Sub-Basin Case Study, Katherine, 15th of December 2007. Subsequently, I have read the report of that session by coffee, and it seems that my expectations of a social impact study differ markedly from those pursued by coffee. Now, have I got time to say this, or can I go on?
No, go ahead.
I believe the following points are relevant. A mechanistic approach which takes no account of the predispositions of the group community being assessed is not likely to produce information on long-term results. The impacts considered are initial impacts, the consequences of which are dependent on the characteristics of the affected group community. These are tangible short-term impacts, whereas I consider an assessment of social impacts requires an examination of the social capital, an intangible asset of the group community and their resilience in dealing with long-term permanent consequences. With regard to social licence to operate, the measures proposed by CSIRO are questionable. The treatment is theoretical and takes no account of the previous interactions between, in this case, the government and industry as promoters of an unconventional gas industry and some members of the NT community. Here we are. Where there is a social licence deficit, I am mindful of the 1 to 5 rule, which is that it takes 5 good interactions to offset 1 bad interaction. And so any treatment of what can the industry do to recover, build a social licence to operate, someone should say you've got to have 5 good interactions, and there's a backlog of bad interactions that goes back 4 years at least. Summary: loss of well integrity in the long term and migration of contaminants to the surface have very high probability. Position of methane as a transitional fuel is being questioned. Economic impact report is deficient. Social impact report follows a development is good and inevitable paradigm. Low confidence that the government can develop and sustain a robust regulatory regime. And until it does, it shouldn't start. I just added that. The technology mix of the unconventional gas industry processes, from my engineering experience, indicate technological overreach, which when coupled with hubris is a predictor of failure. The inquiry is an example of participatory democracy. Fracking is a contentious issue involving the common good and public interest well into the future. The political class is conflicted by their positions of promoter and regulator. I submit that the question should be put directly to the people.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Any questions? Yes, Professor Hart.
Could I just a question or two on your first summary point, which was the well integrity, long-term well integrity.
Yep.
You make the point there that it's highly likely that the cement will detach in some sense. I think there's some good evidence that that's likely to occur, just through movement of the earth and the like. But what would you say to the fact that there's still 4 kilometres, 4 kilometres, and it's got to be, the integrity has got to be damaged all that distance for anything to get through.
That's why I put 100 years time span.
Okay.
That's why my great-grandchildren come to mind.
Okay.
Everything I hear from the industry stop short at plug-in and abandonment.
Yeah.
And they may be right. I mean, prior to that, it's in their commercial interest to fix any leaks.
Indeed.
But after that, they're out of here, if you let them.
Just one other point, though. You talk about, and you made the comments when you asked about methane, but you talk about contaminants in that last dot point. You mean methane?
I didn't want to exclude fluids that occur in some shale deposits and the heavy metals and any leftovers from the fracking materials. So I was being totally exhaustive as I could be.
But you only talked about methane in your research.
I can't exclude it, but I only asked questions. Well, I did ask questions on, if there's a leak, is it possible for gas to go?
Yeah.
Because I was pursuing the path that said, look, you plug and abandon when you stop making money. Surely there's still gas down there because you're not going to extract it to the last molecule. You're not that silly. So gas will continue to be released. Now you've heard, I think, decades. One of the answers you extracted from one of the industry blokes sort of ventured to suggest that decades might be enough, might be a timescale. Well, I want to go beyond that.
Yeah,
because these people want to live here.
It's put to us along the lines of what's going to force the gas up. Yep, it'll be depleted, no question at all about that.
It'll be depleted, but it will.
I know, I agree. But no doubt the pressure for forcing that gas up will be reduced.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I guess that's the argument that's put to us in terms of what is... Yes, gas, if you damage the pathway, yep. But fluids, that requires quite a considerable amount of pressure. And we've been told it's less likely, much less likely.
Yep. And that's really why I switched to the methane in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Because there is an observed, and in fact the latest report was dated January 2018, which I discovered out of Jet Propulsion Laboratories, which is that there is an observed increase in methane in the atmosphere, and they've now developed a technique to distinguish between forest fires, biogenic, and that release from fracking.
Yep.
And the fracking component is alarming.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Yep.
That's good.
Thank you. Anything else? Yes, Dr. Jones.
I note your comment about the regulator, and that's something which is weighing very heavily on our minds about how a regulatory system can be modularised, scaled or otherwise to fit in with the growth of the industry. And do you have any further thoughts about that?
Well, I do. I think it's impossible. I've been there, and you're trying to say here's a program which is in its infancy, and if in the 10th of what we hear about Amungi is true, then there's a hell of a lot of technology assurance yet to be delivered. And so we're now going to ask the regulator to second guess, to be ready 5 minutes before Origin comes in and says, I want to do the next one, and is he going to be ready? Or he's ready, he's sitting there, all dressed up. How many months? And so who's going to stay? Who's going to take a job like that? I mean, these are going to be extremely experienced people, very, 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 very dedicated. And are they going to sit in an office and be offered a job that they don't even know if it's going to proceed?
Well, certainly in the Queensland CSG experience with the regulators there was the industry actually sucked out the experienced regulators by offering them a higher salary, so they started off from a regulatory deficit.
Yeah, so you've got that as well. You can find the people to start with, and there's a very small population up here. So you've sprung the trap. I don't think it's possible, and I don't think they should start. And I think that's the essence of your regulations is don't start until you've got them. And old buggers like me come along and say, I wouldn't like to try and set that up, to say to someone highly qualified, highly experienced, who maybe doesn't even like fishing for barramundi, then come here and sit on your bum waiting for a hell of a lot of exploration with all those questions of whether the process will work. And if there's hydrogen sulfide around, that's a bit of a problem. So the answer is, you've got to it where I was, and I didn't want to say it directly. Thank you.
Any further questions? Again, Dr. Lawson, thank you for coming
Thank
today,
you.
and thank you for, again, you've now presented 3
Well, I hope
times.
to make it short this time.
You've always given us great documents. I know that you'll continue to participate in the inquiry process, and we're grateful.
Thank you.